I don't know what you think about what's happening in the Middle East right at the moment and in Israel, and whether or not you agree with what the IDF are doing. But I'd be most interested to know. Let me know in the comment section below about what it is that you think on this particular issue or not. Or if you're going to do or not, I guess you're not going to make a comment really, but please subscribe to my channel and ring the bell for further notifications, because this is an interesting conversation, because I've been thinking a great deal about how Australia gets involved in these conflicts by simply choosing sides, by suggesting, for example, that what the IDF are doing is kind of acceptable. Yet we don't seem to understand the full picture, and perhaps that's because we're not hearing from the people who are actually embedded in this problem. And I'm about to play a clip that came across on my X today, which is about a woman in Gaza who's talking about what's happening not just in Gaza but also in the West Bank. Now, when I was thinking about this, I was thinking, well, if someone came and invaded my home and killed my family or burnt my home down, in our society, we would object to that. That person, if caught, would be tried for murder, for home invasion, for a whole lot of offences. And we wouldn't bat an eyelid. We'd think, well, this is okay, this is appropriate that this person be tried, convicted and sentenced. That's the way our law works. But when we see the same thing happening in another country, we tend to think of it as acceptable almost, and we don't raise an objection in the way that we would had those same events happened in our own country, to our next door neighbour or to us. We would know what the law tells us is the right thing to do, and would have that adjudicated. Now, the ICC have adjudicated in terms of Benjamin Netanyahu and Hamas recently, and put them in the same box, if you like, and said that they had committed horrible international war crimes. So when we hear, though, what is actually happening in Israel, and particularly also, as this woman will talk about in a moment, in the West Bank, we sit back and we kind of ignore it as if it doesn't matter. Well, actually it does, because all of us as an international community should be concerned about the 35,000 people that have died as a result of the IDF's invasion of Gaza and the genocide that they've created. And we also should be concerned what's happening in the West Bank, which has been happening in the West Bank for decades, since the 60s. So we need to, and I guess it's hard for us to understand the politics of all of this. We sit back and we think, well, it's so far removed from us. But governments give decisions about what happens politically in other countries all the time. And for us to sit back in kind of this neutral position and do or say nothing, I find is horrific, because we need to be concerned about what's happening to people elsewhere. It eventually will impact all of us, because there'll be people wanting to flee, Palestinians who certainly will want to come to this country, and we need to welcome them as Australians should be doing for any immigrant. But we also need to understand the circumstances from which they have come, which is something I think that we actually fail to do a lot of the time. So I'm going to play this clip of this one. It's about 3 minutes, so bear with me as you go through it. And she's reporting from Gaza about what happens in Gaza, and this is something that all of us, and in the West Bank too, and this is something that we all should be concerned about, and we should be asking our politicians to make an appropriate stand against the atrocities which are being perpetrated by the IDF against Palestinian people.
Hey everyone, this is Bisam from Gaza, and Palestine is not only Gaza. Today in the morning, the Israeli army started a military operation in Jenin city and Jenin refugee camp in the north of the West Bank. They've sent more than 1,500 Israeli soldiers, tanks, jeeps and bulldozers. Until now, since the morning, they've killed 7 people, 7 civilians. One of them was a doctor heading to the hospital. Another one was a teacher heading to the school. Another one was a student, a child heading to his school, and more civilians. We're talking also about more than 20 injuries. Most of them are in critical conditions, and one of them was a journalist covering the situation in a hospital in the city. The UNRWA finally at the afternoon had a temporary truce for 30 minutes to evacuate the students from the schools back to their homes in the city and the camp. The situation is very critical. It's the first time after 2 months that the Israeli army invade Jenin city and Jenin camp. It's not only about Gaza, and don't let the Israeli army and Israel take the advantage of all eyes keeping in Gaza, because they are still committing massacres and still committing crimes in the West Bank non-stop. Since the beginning of the genocide, more than 500 people were killed. Most of them are children, are adolescents, and civilians, of course, in the West Bank. Okay, more than 500 people. This besides the settlers' attacks on the vehicles, the farms, the homes, burning people's homes, like literally while people are still in the homes sleeping in the night. What is happening in the West Bank must seen and heard more. This is all beside the Israeli government stealing lands and building more settlements every day. More, of course, since the beginning of the genocide, because all eyes are in Gaza and people are thinking that Gaza is the only place occupied in Palestine, while the West Bank is just suffering day after day. The settlements, you need to know that the settlements in the West Bank are illegal due to the international law, because due to the 1967 borders, the West Bank and Gaza Strip are to the Palestinian Authority. And after Oslo declaration or agreement, after the 1993, the Israelis must withdraw from the West Bank and from Gaza Strip. Now what? They are occupying both.
So the point that I want to make is that we are not doing enough to defend the Palestinian people, whether it be in Gaza particularly, and as she said, we shouldn't forget about what's happening in the West Bank. And our government, quite frankly, needs to make a stand against all violence. We talk about domestic violence, as I said, we talk about home invasions, we talk about violence in general and how that needs to be ruled out in our own country, and we need to be able to make the same emphatic type statements about what's happening also in Israel and in Gaza and the West Bank in particular. And I don't understand, I guess, why it is that we can't simply see, and I've said this before, but I'll reiterate it, why we can't simply say, well, you know, if a defence force is murdering or killing, you know, so many people, like 35,000, there's probably about another, they reckon about another 10,000 plus people that are still buried under the rubble that no one's been able to get to at this point. So let's say it's 40,000, 45,000 people. It's a massive amount of people who should never have died. And why is it that while we can't identify the cruelty and the inhumanity that sits around this massive execution of people, you know, it isn't about saying, well, okay, what happened on October the 7th is okay, because it wasn't. That Hamas are the terrorist organisation that they are. But then we need to, I think, have some understanding as to why that terrorist organisation developed in the way that they did. And when you start to hear, and this is rather controversial, I know, but when you start to hear the reasons, the oppression that Palestinian people have been had to endure over such a long period of time, for a generation, in fact, that you do understand why people would rise up against that oppression. I understand that. Doesn't make it right. I want you to know that, but I do understand it. But then the response is not in proportion to what actually happened on October the 7th. Far from it. Hamas killed innocent people. Terrible, terrible. The response of the IDF is that they're killing innocent people, but they're killing them 30, 40, 50 times more people, destroying communities entirely. And at some point we have to put an end to it. We can't continually sit back and say, well, you know, the Israelis are right. And we've got to stop saying that because you hold a specific view like I do, that you're anti-Semitic. It's got nothing to do with Jews as a religion or Jewish religion. Nothing whatsoever. And neither has got anything to do with Muslims. It hasn't. It's got more to do, and it's got, well, not more, it's got everything to do with the fact that we're killing, or they're killing, innocent people, and we as a community and as governments are letting them get away with it without any condemnation whatsoever. And it's about time we did. I'll be most interested in your comments. I'm sure there'll be plenty of you who will disagree with what I've just said. Fair enough, do so. Have a conversation about it. But let's remember, at the end of the day, this is about a sense of humanity and understanding what is happening to these people who are being and have been oppressed for decades. Let me know what you think in the comments below. In the meantime, take care, look after yourselves, and more importantly, ensure that you and the people that you love are safe.